All right, so far we've been looking at all these great timeline tools that we have, but there's another way of accessing even more tools inside of Smoke. It's using what is called ConnectFX. It's a full node-based compositor built directly in your timeline. So let me navigate back to another shot. At this point, I want to just go to a one-view layout, so I'll use a hotkey. Also, to introduce you to ConnectFX, let's just take a look at it as applied to one clip before we get into doing compositing automatically inside of ConnectFX. You access ConnectFX just like any other timeline effect from the effect ribbon. You'll notice there's the Create ConnectFX option. When I choose this, we step into ConnectFX, and this is a full node-based compositor where each node has an output and that ends up going right back to your timeline. For example, if I wanted to add a color correction tool to this clip, I can take the color correction tool from one of the many tools we have available and just drag and drop it on the connection line. You'll now see I have my footage that goes into my color correction that goes out back to the timeline. If I discard my nodes and select the color correction tool, you'll see we have access to the same color correction tools that we had available inside of our timeline. Let's say we want to make a quick adjustment to this. Okay, now I go back to my nodes. Now let's say we want to add a stylized damage effect. So I'll go to my damage tool, drag and drop that into the flow. Now the color correction tool goes into the damage tool. I'll go to the damage tool parameters where we have a whole set of different presets we can use or create and customize them ourselves. I'll choose the night vision, and now I've got a night vision effect taking place. If I want to switch the preset to something else, I can switch it to a 70s. Now we've got a 70s effect. The point is, each one of these nodes will let you build the composite or effect that you want to use, and then in turn, all of it is connected back to your timeline. If I choose Exit CFX, you'll notice this clip now has the color correction and the damage effect applied to it. And if I ever need to edit or change it, I can just choose Enter Editor, and we step right back into ConnectFX. Let me exit back out of that, and I'll remove the ConnectFX for right now from this clip. Now in the example we're going to look at, I've got three different clips we want to composite together. We got the talent with a camera pullback, we have the back of the editor looking at his screen, and we have the front of the editor. If you remember, this is the big reveal point in the film where the camera pulls back from the talent and we realize that what we are watching is what an editor compositor is working on inside of Smoke. So we want to create this composite. And while a lot of this could probably be done in the timeline, I really want to take advantage of true 3D space and true 3D compositing to create this effect. So to do that, I want to go back into ConnectFX and use our 3D compositing tool, which is called Action. So if I select all three of these clips in my sequence, I'll go back to my effects ribbon, and before I click Create ConnectFX, notice the option Generate Composite. I'm leaving this on, and when I choose Create ConnectFX, Smoke adds an action tool, which is our 3D compositing tool, and every layer that I had out of my timeline is given to me as an individual layer inside of ConnectFX. And this clip right here, which is a red file, had a resize tool applied to it in the timeline. So that resize tool is then converted into a ConnectFX resize tool. By default, it took the bottom layer that was in my timeline and fed it in as the background. Just a quick reference of what the color codes mean inside ConnectFX. Anywhere you see a green input is a background input. Anywhere you see a red input is your front or your RGB input. Anywhere you see blue is your matte or alpha information. As you're going to see, a node-based compositor becomes extremely powerful and very flexible when building composite and high-end effects. What I'd like to do though is take this action and I want to create a new layer. So I'll use a hotkey to do that, and then I'm going to take that output for that new layer and connect it to this front clip of the guy with the monitor. Now looking down below, you can see we have each element stacked up on each other inside of Action. And I can access each layer's parameters by selecting the node. And then if I go to my Object tab, I can manipulate and alter and change this layer in true 3D space. I want to temporarily turn off the front display for this layer of the guy's face because I want to focus on creating a key so that the talent appears in the screen of this footage right here. Now, understanding that this input, the blue is my matte and the red is my front, I can go to my tools set and I can start bringing in tools such as different keying tools like the master keyer, maybe take a matte edge tool. I can connect this now automatically into the scene and I can start to build the matte that will remove the blue of the screen, which then in turn composites the talent into the monitor that the guy is looking at. Now, what I love about the Action tool is it has presets of keying configurations already made for me. So instead of me building a connection, a flowchart to create the key, I'll go to my Action tool, and as I said, every single layer you have has the ability to use a preset of possible keying setups. So where it reads K, if I double click on this, I step into the modular keyer, and now I've got a master keyer that goes into a 2D histogram, that goes into a matte edge, that goes into a garbage mask, and it all goes right back out to the media source inside of the Action environment. I'll select this view and tell it that I want it to be the end result or the output of whatever tool I select. I'll double click on my master keyer to access its parameters. Just like I did in the timeline, I'll click my pot and I'll click and drag into the view where we want to start to pull the key. I'll switch the viewport to look at the matte. I'll switch over to another patch and I'll just click and drag inside to really clean up this key. Looking at the end result, we can see we are now starting to composite the couple into the monitor as we want. With the master keyer selected, I want to point out the color suppression tools. It's on by default. And if I go to this view and we zoom in, with it off, we have all that blue spill that is along the edge of our compositor/editor. As soon as I turn it on though, you can see that it samples the same color you picked for pulling the key and suppresses it. Going further, we got a color trackball that we can shift the color that is being suppressed to be another color to better match his skin tone and his jacket and so on. Now I can go to my 2D histogram, maybe make an adjustment to this, go to my matte edge tool, turn on the blurring options, make adjustments if needed, but I'm pretty happy with this. So now we want to return back to Action. So I choose Return, and we're back out looking at the top level of ConnectFX with the Action tool selected, and we can see that we've got the MK indicating the modular keyer has been applied to this layer. So keep in mind the idea of this shot. We do not want to see the compositor at first. We want to slowly let him come into the scene. So what we'll do is we'll animate him in true 3D space. So now I want to go one step deeper into the Action tool. So with the Action tool selected, if I hit a hotkey, we step into the Action schematic. This is a schematic that controls the relationship of the layers and the elements like cameras and lights inside Action, the 3D world. Once again, we can obviously rotate this in 3D space. We've got all the same parameters such as the surface parameters and much more. Now by default, there's always a camera in Action. And if I take this view here and go to the top view and I zoom back, we can see there's our camera that we can animate, manipulate, do anything we want to do to it. We can even import camera data from 3D applications through the FBX file. More on that later. For right now, what I want to do is take this layer of our compositor and animate it so it's out of the view of the camera in the beginning. So I'll just take it and drag it forward, keeping an eye on the frame of my shot. Once I get it so I'm not seeing it, because auto key is on, my keyframe is made. I'll jump forward several frames to about frame 80. Then I'll use a hotkey and I'll click in my Z position value and set a keyframe. I'll jump forward several more frames. Here's where I want the animator to be in the frame, so I'll just take him, drag him back, right click and set it back to its default value. So now we've keyframed the camera move. Well, actually we didn't keyframe the camera, we keyframed the layer of the compositor. Now let's go and turn back on the front of our compositor himself. And I'll double click on the image to access the image parameters for this layer. Obviously, we really want his face to only be in the screen, the monitor. So here's where, again, being able to switch this layer to not being a flat layer allows us to manipulate and control the shape of it so it fits our needs exactly as we want it to be. Something like this. Next, let's change the blend mode. And just for reference, if you're not familiar with Smoke and you're more familiar with Photoshop, you can tell Smoke to use Photoshop blend types. And now you have access to all the blend modes from Photoshop. I'll choose Screen, and I'm also going to take the transparency down so that his reflection is just as I want it to be inside of the monitor. Now we want to keyframe the transparency. So let me jump back several frames here. Again, I can right click, choose Set Keyframe at Current Value, and then I'll move back a couple more frames and we'll take this 100% transparent. Now the next issue we have is this layer of his face is not animated to follow the movement of the original layer that we keyframed. Well, this is what's great about these nodes, and here's where you start to really understand the power of them. I'll take this axis, which has keyframes already applied to it, and I'll drag off of it, and I drop it on this axis. I now tell this one, you are the parent or the master of that layer. So now both layers will animate exactly together, and we create the effect we're trying to achieve. So this is great. And we go back out to ConnectFX, and we'll return right to our timeline. Now with that layer selected, I'll start to process this. So it's going to take 30 seconds or so to render out everything we did in ConnectFX. But here's the important part. I am in my timeline, and I created all of this directly in my timeline using ConnectFX. What if there's a change that needs to be done? If I'm in a typical editor and I'm using other applications to make those composites such as this, I need to leave my editor, go out to the other application, make the changes, render the files, bring them back into my editor. If we look at the upcoming shots, we've got close-ups of both the talent. And then we go into this shot where the camera's pulled away, and then we get the compositor coming in just exactly as we want it to be. But the director, Jeremy Hunt, at this point said, I really want this couple to be a close-up at this first frame. So here's the power of using Smoke. With this clip selected, I go right back into ConnectFX. I don't have to leave my editor. I don't go to another application. I select this red file. And remember how when we looked at the Media Hub, how we imported our footage, all the control we had over that media while it was being imported. Well, here in ConnectFX or in your timeline, you have access to all those same settings. So now what I can do is access the deburring setting. And remember, we imported this as a quarter. Now I tell Smoke I want it to be half the deburring. So my resolution is going to change from 1280 675 to 2560 1350. This means I've got a much larger file, and if I zoom in on it, I'm not going to see distortion or corruption to the file. I no longer need this resize tool, so I'm just going to throw this away, and then over here in Action, I'll go into its schematic, I'll double click the axis for that layer, and I can scale up this layer at the first frame and position the Y and the X as needed so we have the close-up that we want for the first frame. Then I can move forward several frames, and at this point, with Auto Key On, I can reset all the parameters that I've keyframed back to their default value, and now that I've made my changes in ConnectFX, I exit right back to my timeline. And at the first frame, we can see we have the close-up that we want. So this is a great example of the power that Smoke offers with its all-in-one editing and effects workflow.